Today we have the first of the year, the first of 2026 we have to go over, is one of the specs which for now is giving us the impression it is going to be the most popular of the picks in the next expansion, at the very least at the beginning of the season. When it comes to a Midnight, Restoration Druid seems to be poised to be the healer in the expansion. This is going to be both for the raid and for Mythic Plus. At the moment, by the way, Restoration Druid is the most popular of the picks in Mythic Plus. It's not at all the strongest healer in the raid, it is middling, it is completely average, but in general for both the raid and Mythic Plus we are referring more to their playstyle, to the way it plays, because for example in Mythic Plus it's also not matched, not surpassed by Discipline Priest, but Discipline Priest is also quite popular in Mythic Plus and significantly better in the raid. But why we think it's gonna be better is kind of like when you say that Beast Mastery Hunter is going to be more popular than Shadow Priest, for example, or than Enhancement Shaman. It's often a matter of playstyle, of rotation. In many cases it's a matter of simplicity. Just like up until this expansion, Discipline Priest, generally speaking, tended to, scare away the average player because it was a more complex, more proactive kind of spec requiring ramps worth multiple dozens of global cooldowns, etc, etc. So not many players were approaching the spec. Now in Midnight there's been a lot of changes to Restoration Druid, which, yes, tend to gravitate towards getting simplified, because you now have your Flourish, which is the cooldown that has defined you, especially in the raid for many expansions now, your small ramps of Reju into Swiftmend and empowered Wild Growth, and then you Flourish and you spam a whole bunch of almost free, pretty much, and guaranteed crit regrowths. Now this is gone, because Flourish will be cooked with Tranquility, and Tranquility will have a base unchangeable 3-minute cooldown. Even if you take the talent Flourish, it will still stay at a 3-minute cooldown. So it's not really something you can bank on repeatedly to play around. You also have your power of the Archdruid getting mixed and merged with Soul of the Forest. The extra change now, though, is that Soul of the Forest is no longer going to be including Wild Growth. It's a double power of your next Growth or your next Reju, not Wild Growth anymore, and power of the Archdruid is also not going to include Wild Growth anymore. Power of the Archdruid used to have Wild Growth have a 60% chance to make you triple cast your next Reju or your next Regrowth. Now, it's a guaranteed chance, you're always going to triple cast after you cast Swiftmend and you are consuming your Soul of the Forest. What you have also lost is the ability to double cast Life Bloom. Now you no longer have any talents allowing you to have a second Life Bloom active, and technically you can also lose Efflorescence, because you now have a talent available to you, which can be taken quite often. It's quite easy to take, Life Threading, which makes your Efflorescence be cast automatically and passively on the targets with your Life Bloom. And yes, for quality of life, every time your Life Bloom blooms, Efflorescence actually gets replaced, gets repositioned on top of your target with Life Bloom, as Life Bloom is blooming. So this already makes you lose quite a few of your key passive effects as well as your buttons, because Flourish is gone, possibly Efflorescence is gone entirely, the second cast of Life Bloom is also gone. We haven't mentioned Thrash ability is going missing, because I doubt many players will be mourning Overgrowth or Nourish or Invigorate. You will definitely be mourning more Skullbash, your Interrupt, but to be fair, all the other healers, minus the Shaman, have lost their Interrupt, and Sanayon Ward, which used to be taken a few times in Mythic Plus as an extra hot for your mastery scaling, but it wasn't that big of a deal. What is more of a deal, talking about hots, is losing Cultivation and Spring Blossoms. Spring Blossoms was the extra hot created by Efflorescence, because Efflorescence was just a heal on the ground. It wasn't going to boost your mastery, but the talent Spring Blossom was. It was an extra stack of your mastery. And then Cultivation, the extra heal from your Reju if you were healing someone below 60% HP, was another mastery stack. This is a net buff. Your mastery went from a base of 6% more healing from each hot you have on the target. Those hots have been removed. You lost Cultivation hot, you lost Spring Blossoms hot, you lost a second Life Bloom target as a hot, possible Scenario Ward as an extra hot, but now your base mastery bonus healing is 11%. instead of 6. So on 2 targets, it's 22% instead of 12, or 33% instead of 18, or 44% instead of 24. Yes, there are going to be diminishing returns, but either way, it's a net positive now to have this change, especially even bigger positive in the raid. We aren't done talking about the missing parts. We mentioned you lost the second cast of Life Bloom, possibly Efflorescence if you cook it with Life Bloom itself. You lost Flourish, you lost Scenario Ward, your Interrupt, a bunch of useless spells, and also your Grove Guardians. Your Grove Guardians are now going to be cooked into Swiftmend or Wild Growth. So now, essentially, imagine it's an instant cast off the GCD every single time you cast Swiftmend and Wild Growth, and yes, you can pop them together. You can do Swiftmend into Wild Growth, and you're going to be creating 2 different Grove Guardians. Even if you take, for example, the talent Prosperity to have 2 Swiftmend charges, yeah, if you consume both Swiftmend charges and then you Wild Growth, you spawn 3 different Guardians. Now, as for the new things, well, the new things, interestingly enough, put even more steroid in the 2 side buttons of the spec. You would think the main button of the spec is Rejuvenation. However, Apex talents are all about Life Bloom, and the new added super powerful talents are about Regrowth, not about Reju. So the new added talents are Intensity, which makes your crits be twice as strong. Instead of getting the double value, double number from a crit, you get triple number from a crit. Your 10,000 heal won't crit for 20,000, instead will crit for 30,000. And this is for Regrowth, which makes it super powerful. Remember that Regrowth already has many natural ways to get super high crit. You have improved Regrowth to get a bonus plus 40% crit if you're casting Regrowth on a player already with the hot. This is very good for Mythic Plus, because it's much easier to hit a player that has Regrowth on when you only have 5 targets total to hit. And then the other one, Abundance, right? Each rejuice you have out increase the critical strike chance and cast time of Regrowth by 8%. This is of course stronger in the raid instead, because you can have 10 rejuved up players in the raid, which is 80% more crit chance and cast time of Regrowth. And considering your base crit chance you have already, it practically makes Regrowth a guaranteed crit, which with the aforementioned Prosperity talent makes this even stronger. And then you have the added talent, the other one, Nature's Bounty. This used to be released in a completely broken state because it read Regrowth heals all other allies with Regrowth for 40% of the healing done, which is a massive number. Now it's been toned down to 20% of the healing done. It is weaker now. It's still pretty good. It's not obviously as strong in Mythic Plus because you don't have nearly as many players to splash all of this healing on. But in the raid it will have 2, even 3 times more value than it can have in Mythic Plus. The other thing that powers your spec now, your Apex talents, are about your Life Bloom, as we mentioned, which is funny since we just mentioned you lost the chance, the opportunity to double cast Life Bloom now in Midnight, and now Life Bloom is being boosted. First, Life Bloom will stack every 5 times, stacking up to 3 times in total. The second Apex talent makes 30% of Life Bloom healing splash to 2 allies within 20 yards. And lastly, Life Bloom bursts into a blooming frenzy when you consume Soul of the Forest, causing it to bloom 5 times in rapid succession. All of this is very powerful in Mythic Plus. In a Mythic Plus, low target count, basically setting, it amounts to a lot of healing. Look at this run-of-the-mill high key in the beta. You will find that Life Bloom itself, both the hot and the instant heal, the blooming effects, are almost 15% of your total healing. But then you also have Everbloom, which is the splashing of Life Bloom, getting to almost 9% of the total healing. And then don't forget that when you play with Efflo, you also have Verdancy, which makes it so that you bloom every time Life Bloom blooms, also has the extra pop to the targets affected by efflorescence. So when you take all of this combined, now Life Bloom as a button itself is healing for almost 30% of your total healing, just by itself. Obviously, when you move to the raid, as expected, the value of Life Bloom becomes garbage, because you have way too many targets for a button that only targets 1 player. Yes, it can splash to 2 other players, so he still has a decent extra boost in terms of total healing done in the raid, but it's nowhere near the value you could get of Life Bloom in Mythic Plus. This is perhaps the only worry, talking about the setup of your spec, the fact that you have an Apex talent that is essentially only very powerful in the raid setting, and in Mythic Plus it's just an extra nice like 5% healing buff and nothing else. It is good for single target in Mythic Plus when you have, when you know a player is about to be targeted by a nasty dot, for example, some kind of nasty mechanic like that, you now have an even stronger way to cover them in single target because of Life Bloom and the bonus healing it has now. But the point of why we pointed out that we think this is going to be a very powerful and, more importantly, a very popular spec in Midnight is because of how simple it has been streamlined down. As we have seen, you are going to be losing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, actually almost 10 total buttons. Even if we exclude the buttons you never even pressed, in Mythic Plus you were legitimately pressing Cenarion Ward, the second Life Bloom, the Flourish, the Grove Guardians were all legitimately pressed buttons, so it's already 4 buttons you have out of your rotation or your cooldown options. It has definitely been simplified. You do have fewer options, as we mentioned, Soul of the Forest now becoming super important to pretty much everything proccing in your talent setup, from the empowerment of your next regrowth or rejuvenation, and then the triple casting of those spells, and then the triggering of your Apex talents. Now Soul of the Forest is what is going to trigger Everbloom, so they are very, very powerful. You practically want to be triggering Soul of the Forest every time it's up, every time Swiftmend is off cooldown. But it is undeniable the spec itself is now simply more straightforward to play. In the raid you don't have to worry about almost any kind of ramp, pretty much. You still have Tranquility, which still has this mini, cooked version of a Flourish ramp into it, but it's not really what you play around. So your entire playstyle as you go through a raid encounter, for example, you won't really be able to find any consistent pattern. There's not going to be a lot of proactive gameplay, the classic good old 10 different rejues before you Swiftmend into Wild Growth, or any kind of proactive covering and carpeting of HOTS like you used to do as a Resto Druid, which happened quite often because Flourish only having a 1-minute cooldown, you did have windows to heal like this very often in the raid. It is now gone. Now it's just a very, very, especially now with the power, even more power put into your regrowth, there is less timing required around your Wild Growth, because now Wild Growth doesn't need to be played around Swiftmend. You don't need to empower Wild Growth with Swiftmend anymore, you just cast it whenever. It's much, much more streamlined. In Mythic Plus, it's still streamlined. In Mythic Plus, you don't have the very annoying but necessary playstyle around having to remind yourself and place double Life Bloom anymore. You might even be able to completely skip the other maintenance buttons, which was Efflorescence, because now it can be automatically created around Life Bloom. So it already makes you much more free of buttons when you are in Mythic Plus. You don't have to press an extra Life Bloom and an extra Efflorescence, which is a lot of time saved, honestly. When you look, for example, of a current day very high key in Mythic Plus, well, first of all, half of these Life Bloom casts are gone. So about 95 casts of Life Bloom are gone because you don't have 2 charges. Trash is gone, because your mandatory spreading of dots in Mythic Plus has been made easier because Trash is no longer there. You might replace Trash with what has remained, which is Swipe, but Swipe doesn't do nearly as much as what Trash used to do for you in Mythic Plus. You're also losing Grove Guardians, because they're now, as we said, they are passively activated by these 2. So you don't need to cast this anymore, and you don't need to cast this either, because it can be passive and automatic with Life Bloom. So we're talking about, 95, 160, and then you have 220, and then you can go up to 270 buttons out of the 1500 you're pressing. So it's almost 20%. It's like 17 or something percent fewer buttons you need to press. You can now replace these buttons you're not pressing anymore with more important things or more valuable things. Yes, the more important and the more valuable things now are more condensed into fewer buttons, because effectively as we have been talking about all these pruning, these buttons being removed, what you're left with is Reju, Regrowth, 1 Life Bloom, and then Swiftmend, which now has no relation anymore with Wild Growth. They are completely divided, you don't need to play them around each other. So it's just 5 buttons with Swiftmend and Wild Growth on a short cooldown. Essentially no extras. No Efflorescence, no second charge of Life Bloom, no Cenarion Ward, no Grove Guardians. And it is very simple. It is very straightforward. It's not necessarily bad to play around. It feels good. It still feels good. It feels even better knowing, for example, that as you preft Swiftmend, remember our nice compulsion loop of feel goodness. Whenever you're up to playing Swiftmend, you know that your next button is going to be much more ward well, much more powerful, because you're going to be triple casting Regrowth or triple casting Reju, and they're about to be 100% stronger. So it feels good to see the empowered icon of your Reju whenever you pull that off. Knowing that you don't have every time to do Swiftmend into Wild Growth whenever you want to cast Wild Growth, because now you don't need the power-up buff of Swiftmend to cast Wild Growth, you can just cast it by itself. You're less reliant on cooldowns because you have fewer cooldowns. You lost your flourish, so you have fewer cooldowns. You're also less reliant on carpet bombing the player with every possible imaginable hot, because your mastery has been nearly doubled in power. So you need fewer hots to get to the same result you used to get in live right now with the stacking of your mastery, which is still, for context, a pretty strong stat. Mastery is not gonna beat haste anyways, more or less like it is now in live, but it is still quite good as a secondary stat to go for a Resto Druid. So overall, despite these changes, the spec feels very nice. That's why we're saying despite, because generally when you hear something like this, the amount of things you have lost, almost as if we were talking about survival, or if we were talking about elemental shaman, or maybe Holy Priest, many of the things lost here for Resto Druid that don't really make the spec feel worse when you play it. Even though, as we have documented, the amount of spells you have lost is significant, it's not really that bad when you actually play the spec. Talking about talent-wise, there isn't actually a lot of change if you're switching from Raid setup to Mythic Plus setup. Many of these talents are completely dead and not taken regardless. These two are an abomination. The Ysera's Gift power-up, which used to be a terrible early on talent in live, now for some reason is stuck in here, and it is completely terrible. You also have Embrace of the Dream to give you some slight extra more healing after Wild Growth. Is still far too poorly tuned, so these are never ever taken. You also have this line down here, which is damage line, the new Call of the Elder Druid, the damage buff you have, and the follow-up damage buff. At the moment, healers do so little damage in general compared to what they did in live, even fewer than what they did in live now. The gap has gotten even larger. You're now doing 1/10 of the damage of a DPS. So the value of increasing your damage is terrible in Mythic Plus right now. So already you start from the basis that in the last bracket of your talents, where your strongest talents are, these are untakeable. These are untakeable. So pretty much your options are here. Whether or not you want to be able to turn into a Tree of Life every 4 Swiftmends, whether or not you want Germination for the second cast of Reju, and then the longer Reju, which is generally only used in the raid, rather than in Mythic Plus, where you don't have problems keeping up Reju on 5 players. You don't need the extended duration. This is more valuable for raid settings only. And that's pretty much it. You basically just do this as an option, or possibly this as an option. That's the amount of choice you have in your last bracket because of how bad these possible picks are. You have slightly more options in the middle set, as we mentioned. If you want the instant free efflorescence following your Life Bloom, can be an option, as well as whether or not you want the Regenesis to empower the healing of Reju, especially. When it comes to the raid, the only one you have almost certainty to pick up very often is the extra target heal of Wild Growth. You don't really need to hit a 6th player in Mythic Plus, because I've been told there are no 6 players in Mythic Plus, so in Mythic Plus it's pointless, but in the raid it has more value. But besides those though, as we have seen, it's not that Resto Druid has some completely revolutionary talent setups between Mythic Plus and the raid. They are very, very similar, because they functionally do the same thing in both settings. even if you play with different hero talents. Wild Stalker and Keeper of the Grove, Wild Stalker has been significantly weakened compared to live. You know, if we go back to our live character, the power of your Wild Stalker is visible here. Symbiotic Blooms and Bursting Growth by themselves are doing 27% of your total healing, coming from a single hero talent. In the new version of Resto Druid in Midnight, you have your Bursting Growth and your Symbiotic Blooms doing about 8% total healing. So it's nowhere near the power you currently have in live with these hero talents. So it's not nearly as impactful as it was before. It's still, though, Wild Stalker, the main choice for Mythic Plus, but not nearly as important or relevant as it was in live right now in the War Within. That's why we went over Resto Druid first as a healer, as a recap of what they have gained and what they are losing in Midnight. They are losing a lot. They're losing a lot of passives, a lot of passive hots you had to keep track of, a lot of passive effects like Power of the Earth Druid or Soul of the Forest being cooked together. You lost boring, tedious maintenance buffs like the second charge of Life Bloom, like the Efflorescence, like the off the GCD Grove Guardian clicks are all gone now, or can be gone with talents. Dead, never taken talents no longer pretend to stay in the talent tree, like Overgrowth, like Nourish, like Invigorate, they are all gone. And the key of the spec is that both Life Bloom and Regrowth have been significantly empowered by the new additions instead of Reju. Now Reju is pretty much your third button overall in both the Mythic Plus and the Raid in terms of power level compared to both Life Bloom and Regrowth. But overall, even though mentioning all of these things that have been removed and will go missing, the spec itself is still not quite bad to play. It still feels nice and satisfying. You have enough things to keep track of and to expend that you know are going to give you a power-up boost that feels satisfying to play. You have lost your ramp mechanic in the Raid that will feel the worst overall. Perhaps also why the healing numbers in the Raid for Druid are quite mediocre at the moment, since they don't have too clear of a direction in what they want to do. They are basically kind of like a Holy Priest now in how they heal in the Raid. But in general, the current version of Resto Druid is very good and is very popular in Mythic Plus at the moment, and it is likely going to continue to remain a very popular choice because of the style it now has. So this was our first pick of the season, our first pick of the year in terms of reviews of the specs so far in Midnight, as we are at this point officially not even a month away from the pre-patch of the next expansion. So for today, on, I don't know what this is, man, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, on this Friday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, we have been getting closer and closer, but still we are getting teased only. We are at 1 degree right now.